So today we're going to look at some do's and don'ts, actually some don'ts and do's for speaking in our series of reflecting on the power of words. And we've got, if you like, a very simple text here. Just, it's laid out, we've read it. Some simple don'ts and some simple do's. It reminds us as well, the central thing, just that we do things with words. Sometimes we're unaware of that, aren't we? But when we speak, we do things. At the best and the worst, at the most dramatic, we break things and we mend things. We can scar people, we can heal people. At the most mundane, we can get the salt passed and the door closed and a cup of coffee made. But whatever, when we speak, we are getting things done. And the text today just has some simple guides for how we speak, what we do, some don'ts and some do's. And so we start with the Ten Commandments, and that one commandment in particular, do not bear false testimony. Now, that becomes very quickly in the scriptures the very simple prohibition, don't lie. Don't bear false testimony, don't lie. And at the outset, we have to note that there's a problem with that. I don't know how many of us have heard the Ten Commandments, even just the references to them today, and slightly recoil, because we don't like living with a load of don'ts. Takes us back, doesn't it? Don't run in the corridor. Don't talk with your mouth full. You know, you can just reel them off. And that don't voice drips into you as well. And some of us just live with a little voice in our heads going, don't. And it shows there the power of words. We often don't like to hear the don'ts. And sometimes people have a notion of faith, which is all don't, and then the odd do. I remember growing up, it was very simple in our youth group in church. There were 3 don'ts. Don't smoke, don't drink, and don't sleep around. The 3 don'ts. Strangely enough, it's advice I could get from my doctor now, but it was the youth pastor who said it to me back then. And we get this sense of loads of don'ts. And in fact, see, just what do we think? How many of the 10 Commandments are framed in that negative terminology? Do we know? How many have we got? How many don'ts are there in the 10 Commandments? 9. Someone's going to go with 9. Any advance on 9? Lower? Higher? No, let's go lower, higher. I like that. Sounds like a game show. Could catch on. Who's going to go higher?
I'm changing it to 8.
You're changing it to 8? So you're going lower? Wilma goes lower on herself. Anyone want to go higher than 8? Yeah, 10. I'll give you a little hint, just because you sat next to your mum. There's one positive at least, and that's honour your mother and father. So. But, okay, are we going to go from 8? We've got an 8, a 10. Are we happy with 8? Yes. Okay. Strange enough, it depends how you count, because I was going to go with 7, but if you say there are 10 commandments, we can pick this up over coffee. If you say there are 10 commandments, then 7 of them are framed in negatives. Sometimes it sounds like there are 11 commandments, really, but that didn't catch on. It's not such a snappy thing. And at that point, there would be 8. But in any case, there's lots. There's the majority, isn't there? So, but even those negatives have a positive function. It could be said, a nice short number of commandments has a very positive function, because for those of us who don't like don'ts, for those of us who rebel naturally to these things, the 10 commandments, and particularly the 7/8 don'ts, are a way of not butting in too much into people's lives. When it comes to action, you could say something like, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery. After that, do what you want. Do you know what I mean? It gives these broad parameters. Don't go beyond certain things. But most of us can live, can't we, relatively well without don't murder, don't steal. It sets wide perimeters. In terms of worship, we get the first 2. Don't make idols, don't use the Lord's name in vain, don't misuse the Lord's name. Worship God. We can all argue about how to do it at that, but the commandments, the initial commandments, mark out this broad territory. And you know, when it comes to speech, there's one. When it comes to speech, it is don't lie. Better, don't bear false testimony. Basically, don't lie about other people and don't lie for gain. Very simple. Very simple don't. That's not too oppressive, is it? Don't lie about other people and don't lie for gain. You could say it gets ramped up very quickly to be don't lie about other people, don't slander other people. There's an interesting distinction. Don't slander other people, i.e. don't sum other people up with the negatives about them, because that's lying in any case. People are always more than the worst bit of them. So don't slander and don't lie for gain. After that, say what you want. That might be a slight exaggeration there. But if you're not lying about other people, and if you're not slandering other people, and if you're not lying for gain, well, you could probably get by. A lot of what you say is going to be fine. And it's a good time to put in a good word for that commandment and that simple interpretation, don't lie. Because evidently it's a massive struggle in the world we live in at present, isn't it? When I say the phrase alternative facts, it tells us, doesn't it, that we have world leaders, Donald Trump and his alternative facts, when he would say things that were just grossly wrong, and it would have to be me re-represented. No, he wasn't lying. He was presenting alternative facts. Closer to home, we had a prime minister who was lied and then lied about lying. And we are told that we live in a post-truth society. Post-truth. What does that mean? After truth, as if truth was something to do with yesterday. We live in a post-truth society. You have to look back to get at any notion of truth. And one of the results of this is that, according to surveys, people don't trust politicians anymore. I was going to do a quick straw poll, but I don't want to get onto the depressing. But people evidently don't trust. Even the good ones are struggling because they are tarred with that brush. And so what we find out, this simple prohibition, don't lie. Why? Because lying breaks things. It breaks something in the fabric of our society. It breaks something in the fabric of our life. It breaks our institutions. If you can't trust anybody, if you won't trust anybody, how can you get things done together? And if you've ever been lied about, you know that it breaks people as well as institutions. If you've ever been slandered, if you've ever been summed up by a couple of your worst moments or characteristics, you know that that's something that breaks things. You can't operate. You can't relate. So it's time for a good word about this don't. Don't lie. Very, very healthy. It protects the community. It protects society. It protects people. It's important. Don't lie. Don't lie particularly about other people. Don't slander. And don't lie for gain. After that, speak. And notice too, as well, that this is very relational and it's very practical. Don't lie about other people. Don't lie for personal gain. And sometimes we're tempted to get quite philosophical at this point, a bit abstract. We start to make comments like, all lies are the same to God. And it doesn't matter if it's the smallest white lie said to hurt someone, said so that you don't hurt someone else's feelings, or the biggest lie meant to ruin someone else, or meant to bring gain to you personally. They're all lies, they're all the same to God. Well, at least that's something we could discuss over coffee. Yeah. Is that the case? But let's note that the text doesn't say that. It's really aimed at something relational. Don't lie about other people. Those are the big ones. Don't lie for personal gain. That's the big one. I remember my nan, a wonderful woman, before I denigrate her in my little example here, but my nan, a wonderful Christian woman, had such scruples about lying that once one of her little nieces came to her just before she was going to a party and she said, "Nan, do I look pretty in my new dress?" Well, my nan just said, "No, not really." Little Al burst into tears, refused to go to the party, and Nan, it was the dilemma. She said, but she didn't. It was a horrible dress, and I just couldn't bring myself to lie, because all lies are the same. Corrie ten Boom, she lied to the Nazis and hid Jewish people during the Second World War. Is that the same? Let's just say at least it's not covered by this commandment. We can get into if there are better ways of living, but we have to note at this point that life is complicated. And so that rule becomes a livable rule. Don't lie against other people. Don't lie for gain. And we can have big discussions about all the rest in ethics or morality classes. This came home to me. We live these things. When Claire and I were working as pastors in Italy, we worked a lot with migrants. And the church had many, many migrants in it. And many of them were illegally present in the church. They had no documents. And this was a big phenomenon in Italy at the time. And the government issued a decree, a moratorium. It was something like 9 months. In 9 months' time, all those people that could demonstrate that they had a job and that they had a contract for a house could be given documents to live. Great celebrations in church. We had well over 30 illegal migrants in the church. Great celebrations of these people saying, we can finally live properly in life. We can get contracts, we can pay our tax, we can do everything. Gradually, people would start coming into church and say, our employers are not prepared to declare the truth to the government. They're not prepared to sign this document to say that, that they employ us, because they don't want to pay the taxes. And so the deadline was getting closer and closer, and there was no solution for people who had contracts, for housing. They had jobs. They were making money, but they couldn't get their documents. And so it was proposed in church that people from church sign the documents for these people to say, this person works for me. This person works for me, I employ them. The arrangement would be that the person who was benefiting, the migrant, would pay the extra tax, because people in church couldn't pay the tax. And that would then get them through this period. They could then look for a proper job, because they would have documents, and they could get on with their lives. They wouldn't miss this opportunity. And there was one lady, she was a church elder, who decided to do this for 2 people. And at the time, you had to bring the documents to the questura, which is the central police station. You had to lodge them in front of a police officer and sign something. And it was a scary thing to do, because you felt like you were really going into this place of law and order and saying something quite irregular. And it was punishable if you were caught to be doing the wrong thing. So our church elder arrived there with the documentation for two people, for her pension and her mother-in-law's pension. 2 domestics who work in our house, tiny little house. And she lodged these things, but she had a terrible scruple about it. She just couldn't live with the fact that she was looking at this person and saying something wrong. So he asked her to sign the form. She signed the form. And then she looked up and she said to this police officer, I should just say to you that I do not feel guilty for declaring that which is false in your presence today, because I'm doing it to help out 2 people who otherwise won't be helped. And the policeman just looked at her for a moment, and then he just said, Signora, we've all got to live by our conscience, and filed the papers, and it went on. Now, we could all discuss the ins and outs of that. Did this lady do the right thing, or did she do the wrong thing? But one thing we should note there, we could ask ourselves, was her declaring what was false, was her lie there just the same as Boris Johnson's lies or Donald Trump's lies or anybody else's lies? Or was there something different? And the only thing we could note, by this criteria of the 10 Commandments is that the church elder, Dina was her name, don't tell anyone though, was that she didn't lie about anyone else, and that she didn't lie for gain, And in fact, she lied at great cost to herself and at great risk to herself for someone else. And Dina, in my books, gets lumped together with the likes of Corrie ten Boom and other people who had to live in a complicated system and still live according to the scriptures. Now, it'll be up to each of us how we think that's gone, but we should notice this, that the don'ts are there to protect people. They're not an abstract thing. They are tied to those things. Do not lie about other people. Do not lie for gain. It's the protection of the community, even though life is complicated. And so those are the don'ts. We'll ponder that. It would be great over a coffee to see what we make of it. What about the do's? Because it tends towards a do. We get these don'ts. Don't do it. In the Old Testament in particular. Almost immediately they start to be framed in terms of positives. They push to the positives, and we've read how the laws become positive in the New Testament, where Jesus highlights what are the big important laws. Love God, love neighbour. Love God, love neighbour. Suddenly you've worked it through, not to the negatives anymore, but to the positives. And we get to Ephesians, where it becomes speak the truth. Speak the truth. So we go from a negative, don't lie, to a positive, speak the truth. And here as well, we find that there's problems with speaking the truth. How many of us consider ourselves people who speak the truth? Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, there's a good number of people who say, well, that's the sort of person I am. And we often have this sense as well, when I think of people who speak the truth, two people who come often to mind in this context, because they would regularly say to me this phrase, I speak as I find. I speak as I find. I say it as it is. Does anyone know that sort of person who say, I speak as I find? Or I tell you the truth, warts and all. I tell you the truth, warts and all. I don't dress things up. But I have to say that the two people I have in mind, they're not here, so I can say what I like about them, would often tell me the truth, warts and all, but I never ever received a compliment from them. I very rarely received an encouragement from them. But if anything was wrong, they could be trusted to tell me it was wrong. And we have to work this through. Plain speaking doesn't just mean being critical. It doesn't just mean underlining the difficult things. Ephesians 4 has a far more tender picture in mind, doesn't it? Speak the truth to one another. Build each other up. Say the kind and encouraging things that are true. People do good things all the time. And it's truthful as well to stop and say, you did well. That's a good thing, isn't it? How often do we stop and say that? That's also telling the truth. Telling the truth isn't always saying that was wrong. Sometimes it's just stopping and saying, do you know what you did there? That was good. That was really good. That did me good. That did someone else good. It's that kind of thing. Build people up. And you know, in that story of Dina that I told, Dina learned to act differently because she started speaking the truth in church. And this is where church really works. And do you know what the truth was? That those people that she went to the police station for, outside in the wider community, they were called migrants. I tell you what, they were called a lot worse than that often as well. Do you know what they were called in church? Do you know what Dina called them when she spoke the truth? What do we call people? Sorry? Friends. Fantastic. In Italian, actually, we called each other every Sunday brother and sister. So she learned to speak the truth as she met people that outside were called all sorts of other things, and most politely, migrants. But in church, she learned to speak the truth. Brother, sister. And it changed everything. It changed the way she acted. And so we note that in speaking the truth, it's a positive. It's not just underlining the bad things. In fact, if you speak the truth about the good things, if you speak the truth that builds people up, they'll listen to you when you've got the hard things to say as well. But Ephesians, there Paul is saying, build one another up. Elsewhere it will be, build one another up in love. That's what's called for here. So here we have the don'ts and the do's. Don't lie about other people. Don't lie for gain, because this will protect the community and it will protect people. Next, do tell the truth, the whole truth. Not just the ugly truth, warts and all truth. Tell the beautiful truth as well. Tell the good truth. Underline it, because that will build people up and will build the community. And God will be honoured and we will be blessed. Amen. We're going to